Class number 11. This class is about Moshiach. Moshiach in Hebrew is in English the Messiah. We'll start with Eliyah. If you can tell us, what does the word Moshiach mean in your opinion? Just translate the word, not who it refers to, but what does the word mean?
I never actually thought about this, but I'm sure it has some sort of like translates to like some Hebrew thing. I'm trying to think. Moshiach. I mean, I just think of it as the Messiah, like, but I don't know exactly what it, like somebody who will come back. There's a lot of different interpretations of what's going to happen, but.
Oh, very good. So you're right on who it refers to, but the literal translation of the word Moshiach comes from the word Mishicha, like Mishicha means to anoint someone, or like when we pour something onto someone. And they used to do that when they anointed new kings or new rulers, the Kohen Gadol, they would pour something on, like a special oil. So Mashiach means the anointed one. The Moshuach, which means the one that was designated and specialized for this task. So that's a literal translation, but you're right. It refers to an era of life, which is a little bit in a mystery, and that's what this class is all about, to clarify what exactly is this concept. And Sheila, asking you, when you hear the word Mashiach, which we just explained means anointed one, other than the literal translation, in 10 seconds, what does it bring to mind? What type of thing does Messiah bring to mind? Oh, let's see if you can unmute. Oh, there we go.
Now do you hear me?
Yeah, now I hear you. Perfect.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Something like all knowing, all good.
Very, very good. Mashiach is going to be this all good time. And Layla, which religion do you think invented the idea of Mashiach or Messiah in English?
Judaism.
Right, very good. So unlike popular belief, which some people believe that it was a Christian idea, which the Jews stole from the Christians, most of the time, or as far as I can think of every time, it's the Christians stole something from the Jews because we were around before them. So starting with the concept of Mashiach, it is a Jewish tradition, and not just something that came about later, but it is fundamental in the Jewish belief from the beginning. So we'll start with reading the overview. And Eliyah, if you'd like to read for us this paragraph.
Sure. Okay, wait.
It's in page 228 in the student book, if you have that in front of you.
Yeah. I'll just do it here. The world was created with a purpose, to reflect God's will and be a home for his presence. But the world seems full of corruption, tragedy, and just mundane, ungodly things. This is because there's still work to do. We are here in this world to help it reach its purpose, to redeem its godly intention. When we live in a way that allows our soul power to shine through, and when we use everything in the world in the same manner, we make the purpose apparent and clear to see. When we all do this for ourselves and our surroundings, the entire world will reflect its true purpose. This is called the time of Moshiach, a time where there will be no more war, suffering, or bigotry for the world, and all of society will feel safe and see God's presence within themselves, each other, and the universe.
Very good. So to give a recap, Mashiach is not about bringing a different idea to the world and overtaking what we currently have. Mashiach is the culmination. It's the goal that we've been driving towards from the beginning. And we'll start off with a beautiful analogy that I once heard to bring out this point. There was once a couple back in the day when there were landlords that were in charge of vast areas. And if anybody didn't pay rent before credit scores and lawsuits, the method was you throw them into jail. They were thrown into prison until they can somehow pay the rent, which was ironic because once you're in prison, you cannot get the money. But that was the custom, that was the deterrent for getting people to make sure they pay the rent on time. If you did not pay your rent, they would throw the person in jail until they came up with the funds, or family, relatives, community would help them out. So this one family was falling behind on the rent through no fault of their own. It was just a tough time. And they were thrown into jail, thrown into prison, and they were there with other families. While they were in prison, they had children. And they told their children, you should just know that this is not ultimate life. This is not really where we should be. This is jail. We're in a dungeon. There's no sunlight. We don't get access to outdoors. Before human rights, where you have to have some point of time where you get to see the light of day, they were in a dungeon day in, day out, 24/7, 365 days a year. But they tell their children, you should know there's a real world out there, a world where the sun rises and the sun sets, the moon comes up, there's homes, there's horse and wagons, there's farms, people are planting and growing things, and there's furniture, and they're giving them a picture of a beautiful world. Years pass, the couple dies, and their children get married with other children that were in the jail, and generations start growing of people that were never out in the real world. They only grew up in this dungeon where they didn't see anything else. And now when the second generation and third generation comes, the older children, they tell the younger ones, they say, we never experienced the real world, but we met our parents, which told us that they experienced it firsthand. And then as the generations went on, 5 generations, 10 generations, already it came to a point where no one has ever experienced what it is to live in the real world. The only thing they knew was their dungeon. And within their dungeon, they were developing really well technology. They learned how to hew stones out of the rock, and they learned how to make for themselves a little quarter where they can sleep, and how to put together some dirt and form it into a bed. And they felt really technologically advanced. And they were proud of themselves. They were establishing a life. They had their own government system. And the only thing they knew about was food comes down every day from on top. This whole delivers food. That's where they get their food from. That's where they drink. And none of them had experienced the real world. At some point, they start doubting it. And they say, who said it even exists? Maybe this is all what it is. Who said we're in a dungeon? Maybe these fairy tales that our great-grandparents told us is because they were making up stories, but we never experienced it. We never met anyone that did. Who said that's going to be better? It might be really boring getting out of this dungeon where I just established my whole quarters and I put up this little curtain as a separation. I feel really proud of my inventions. Why would I want to go to somewhere else? And then at one point, someone comes and decides they want to free everyone from prison. They pay off all the debt. And these people are told you can come out to the real world. And they start climbing out of this dungeon, and they're blinded by the sunlight, which they never heard of before. And they say, I don't want to go out. I want to stay right where I was. This is perfect. This is the life I know. I don't know of that other life. How tragic would it be to this family that they're so unaware of how primitive their life is that they don't even want to get to a better life? That's an analogy for our lives during this time. We feel very productive, very creative. We're working on our degree and we're working on our job and we're getting married and we bought a home and we have our car. We're working on all our details and we feel very content with what we have. Even if we don't truly desire a better world, a world where we won't be caught up with the pettiness within a dungeon, but we'll be able to see the real light, be able to see a godly light. Even if we don't have that desire on our own, at least we should be aware that we're in a dungeon. At least we should be aware that we're in a life that's not perfect, a life that's very petty, a life that people just like gossiping and talking about one another, but that this is not the ultimate life. We hope and pray for better times when we will be able to fully be ourselves, to be the way God wanted us to be when he created us, to live a life more than just the pettiness, but to live a life with greater goals, connecting to God, connecting to something eternal. That is the type of life we look forward to in the days when the Moshiach will come, when the Messiah will come. Let's move on in our student book over here, page 230. And Layla, if you'd like to read the introduction.
What is the Jewish obsession with about Moshiach? Was it a battle cry born out of desperation? Will Moshiach be a great disruption to our lives? Will everything change? Change can be frightening.
So what would you answer on these two questions?
Well, I'll start with the second one. I
Sure.
feel like, considering what I know about the Messiah coming, like, yeah, it would be a great change, and change is scary, but I think it would be amazing. Like, everybody is supposed to be very happy. And then the Jewish obsession with the Messiah, like, I don't know. This is very tricky. I don't know.
Right. Okay. So you got a very good answer on the second question. And on the first one, when he
actually,
oh.
I feel like I have heard that I know, like, what's his name? The Ari made Judaism very about, like, leading up to the Messiah and gave it kind of a purpose. Whereas before, I don't really know if there was such an emphasis on the Messiah, and it was more like cyclical, like we weren't going somewhere. And I guess that was out of, like, the suffering in Europe, but I don't know if that's right.
Okay. No, I'm glad you brought that up, and that's what this class is to clarify. That Mashiach was not a fairy tale that mothers that didn't know how to handle their children growing up in a Holocaust or growing up with the Crusaders or the Spanish Inquisition had to come up with something to look forward to. So they said, oh, let's pull this concept called Messiah out of the box, and that will be our dreams. But rather, when we say the obsession, if you notice how many times throughout our prayers and how many times throughout our traditions of doing celebrations do we constantly ask for Mashiach. The Passover Seder, which is celebrating freedom, finishes off next year in Jerusalem, meaning we're not happy, we want to be next year in Jerusalem. When we celebrate a holiday, every holiday finishes off with the blessing after the meal. There's a special blessing. The third blessing is always speaking about God should have mercy upon us, bring us back to Jerusalem, build back your temple, and allow us to become again free people. In our prayer, which we do 3 times a day, we say from the 19 blessings, I have to count again, but 7 or 8 of them are about asking for Mashiach, asking for the Messiah in one way or another, either saying, God, return, restore your glory, build back Jerusalem, bring us back to the Holy Land, allow us to annihilate all those that oppress us. In other ways, we're asking for the final redemption, the Messiah. And the question is, why do we have this obsession? What's wrong? What happens if someone says, my life is good? I actually don't feel oppressed. I have a good job. Everybody's healthy. I don't have desires for something that I feel my life is falling apart. I feel like everything is going perfectly well. I don't want the Mashiach. I don't feel a need for it. Why do we have to say that everyone needs it? I could understand someone that's going through a loss in the family, someone that's struggling financially. They say, oh, we need the Messiah to come. But what happens if I don't feel that way? That is what this class is going to come to explain. It's not a desperate cry for those that feel oppressed. It is the ultimate goal of everything that we're working for. Even in times of prosperity in the Jewish nation, did they yearn and pray for the Mashiach, for the Messiah to come. So let's just look at a short activity here. If you were to design your perfect car, and you were to give basic ideas of what your car needs, we'll narrow it down. We'll go through this a little faster without all the examples given so we could cover the class on time. Basic car has 3 things, just like everything in life. Every machine could be divided into 3 categories. You have the features, which the features are the fact that it has an engine and it has wheels that can turn. You have the function. The function is, what is the purpose of the car? The function is to drive. That's what it does. It drives. And then you have the third point, which is the purpose. Why do I want something with these features that can do this function in order for me to get from here to there? So everything in life is divided in those three categories: the features, the function, what it can do, and the purpose. Why do I want it to do X, Y, and Z? Let's go on to our slide. Oh, did it switch over? Yeah. Okay, it shows you now a lesson 11, Moshiach. Yeah, okay, I hope so.
Yes.
Okay, so now pulling up this slide, if we were to ask Shterni, these are the questions for you. What are the features of the universe? And you read the questions and tell us your answer.
Okay, what are the features of the universe? So I would say life is one feature. What is the function of the universe? I'm not really sure if I'm answering it the right way, but like, I guess for life, or I'm not really sure, because the
Okay.
universe is not just Earth. So,
Right.
and then what is the purpose of the universe? Well, it's Hashem's will, that we like make the world, that we fulfill Torah and mitzvahs in the universe.
Okay, no, that's good. So just to clarify, so like you said, it's not just referring to the world, the universe in general. The features are stars, planets, earth, trees, animals, humans. Those are all the features of the universe. The functions of what it does, it's a space with which to fulfill God's commandments. Meaning, why did God create everything? Or what can everything do? It's an area where we can fulfill God's desires. We can fulfill his Torah and his commandments. And the purpose of it all is to have it revealed in this world that God is present and God is the creator. The purpose of everything is that God hid himself in order that we, doing God's commandments, can reveal God into this world. So if that is the purpose of the world, comes the next question. Elia, can you read the question and give us your perspective on the answer?
How would you rate the success of the universe? I think it's successful depending on how you look at it. While we're living, we figured out different like ways of how societies can function. But then there's also like animals, and then there's like different planets. I don't know if we figured everything out. Like maybe we're supposed to like meet other creatures from other planets, but I mean, I think it's successful. I don't know.
Right. No, that's okay. So you think we're getting to the success of where we're supposed to be. What would you say is the ideal, the final goal? Where are we supposed to be at the end that you say, okay, we finished our mission?
Peace. And I mean, I don't know. That'll happen when Moshiach comes, I think, but I don't know.
Right. Okay. No, you're 100% right. You're on track, which I'll clarify that as well about our preparation to get to that place. Okay. So based on if we're trying to get to the perfect world, comes the question, and Layla, if you'd like to read this question.
What are the necessary conditions in order to fulfill Torah and mitzvot properly?
Okay, so what do you think we need in order to be able to live a proper life, to fulfill God's commandments?
I think definitely study the Torah, like know what it says, so you can further connect with God. And we've talked about being Jewish as an ongoing process, and so like the continuous study of Torah and Talmud and debating and working in chavruta, I guess, like they're doing here.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Which in short would be connecting to God. Now the question is, can a person connect to God in a environment which is very oppressive to their lifestyle? If you were living in a society which doesn't allow you to fulfill your dues to God, if you're living in a society where there's hunger, there's war, there's crime, there's corruption, there's famine, how would someone be able to serve God then? So let's look in the sources and see what is it that God tells us he will do in order to allow us to continue serving him. We'll read, this is from Leviticus. And Sheila, if you'd like to read this paragraph.
If you follow my statutes and observe my commandments and perform them, I will give you rain. I will give you I will give you rains in their time. The land will yield its produce, and the tree of the field will give forth its fruit. Your threshing will last until the vintage, and the vintage will last until sowing. You will eat your food to satiety, and you will live in security in your land. I will rest to the land, and you will lie down with no one to frighten you. I will remove wild beasts from the land, and no army will your land. You will pursue your enemies, and they will fall by the sword before you. 5 of you will pursue 100, and 100 of you will pursue 10,000. And your enemies will fall by the sword before you. I will turn towards you, and I will make you fruitful and increase you, and I will set up my covenant with you. You will eat very old produce, and you will clear out the old from before the new. And I will place my dwelling in your midst, and my spirit will not reject you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you will be people.
Right. Okay, so to recap, the Torah here is telling us, follow my commandments, and God says, I promise you the best of the best. I'll give you an amazing life. Now, the question is, why does God promise us amazing life if we follow his commandments? Is this the reward? Is God saying, follow my commandments, and then you'll live an amazing life, and that is the ultimate goal of why you should fulfill the commandments, so you should be blessed? So let's read Maimonides. Sterni, if you'd like to read this paragraph.
Mishnah Torah Hilcha Teshuvah. We are promised in the Torah that if we fulfill it with joy and good spirit and meditate on its wisdom at all times, God will remove all the obstacles which prevent us from fulfilling it, for example, sickness, war, famine, and the like. Similarly, he will grant us all the good which will reinforce our performance of the Torah, such as plenty, peace, and abundance of silver and gold, in order that we not be involved throughout all our days in matters required by the body, but rather will sit unburdened and thus have the opportunity to study wisdom and perform mitzvahs.
So Maimonides explains that it's not about the ultimate goal is just to have a lot of money. God is telling us in those verses in Leviticus that if you obey my commandments, I will give you everything you need to continue having the opportunity to obey my commandments. Meaning, do the right thing, and I will invest more in you because you're doing the right thing. I will give you blessing, I will give you success, give you peace because you're spending your time on positive things. But if you don't spend your time on good things, if you start taking the blessing and using it for selfish reasons and not understanding that it comes from God and he's giving it so we should be able to serve him better, rather we use it to serve ourselves more, then God says, I'll take it away in order for you to wake up, to learn to do the right thing. So during the good times of the Jewish people, they were given these blessings, not as that is the reason why they were serving God in order to get these blessings, but God gave them the blessings so they can continue perfecting the world and making it a better place. They can continue serving God, studying Torah, and performing his commandments. If so, what is exile? We see now what is the purpose of the world, the function of us doing commandments, and the purpose is that we should be able to rectify the world. But let's move on to point number 2 in the class. What is exile? If you want to look at the non-perfect time in Judaism, it's like a virus. And let's have Layla, if you could read this B.
The world, okay, exile, the ultimate virus. The world was programmed and created to reveal God, but at the moment, that purpose is clouded over and hidden. Like a virus that corrupts the computer's code, the exile corrupts the godly message that the world is supposed to exist.
Right. So this is where it changes our outlook on life, and we become like childish, just as children see certain things their way and they don't know how to see the larger picture. And as adults, we feel bad, but we say, okay, they're children, makes sense that they don't see it the way we do. Exile gives us this backwards way of thinking that we'll spend all our time doing pursuits that are worthless, but we're convinced that we're actually getting more followers and we're getting more attention, and we start doing things that are detrimental for ourselves, believing that we're actually helping. Let's pull up the slide over here. So the normal life we have becomes accustomed to, the normal life we have become accustomed to is entirely unnatural. It appears to be that this is a normal way of living life, but ultimately, the true reality of what we're looking for is not the way we're currently experiencing life. We are living right now in a disoriented reality and an altered existence where people believe it's all about our looks and it's all about how many friends you can have online, how many followers and how popular you are and how many movies or how much money, instead of us seeing the true reality of what is our mission or what is the type of life we want to live in. We'll have here a quote. Let's read. This is from the Maharal from Prague. And Elia, if you'd like to read here.
Yes. Okay. Therefore, we cannot explain the concept of final redemption, Geula, without explaining the concept of exile, Galut, and Hulban, destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. It is by this means that we can come to know the goodness and salvation which we hope for. There is another reason to explain the concept of exile first. The exile itself is proof and clear imperative for redemption. This is because there's no doubt that exile is an alteration and departure from normal order. The Blessed Holy One arranged each nation in the place which is appropriate for it. So he arranged the people of Israel into the place which is appropriate for it, namely the land of Israel. Exile from their place is a complete alteration and departure from that order. Anywhere which departs from its natural place, which is outside its place, is unable to stay in the place which is not natural for it. Rather, they need to return to their natural place. Similarly, dispersal is not natural state of affairs, just as each thing returns to its place. So dispersed and separated parts have no return to become one entity. Therefore, the dispersal of the people of Israel among the nations is a thing which exists outside of nature, since the people of Israel is one nation, suitable to be standing together as one, as is found in the case of all natural things which are not divided into two. Furthermore, according to the order of existence, it's not appropriate for a nation to be subjugated by another under the water of a yoke upon it, because the Blessed Holy One created each nation with its own purpose.
So to recap, he says to understand the concept of redemption, we have to understand what's the issue with exile. What's the problem with exile? That it's not the natural way to be. Naturally, we should each be under our own rule, in our own country, within our own environment, not subjugated to another nation. Exile, therefore, is the lack of all those givens. Exile is when a person is under someone else's control, in someone else's country, in someone else's environment, taking on someone else's customs of how they should live their life. So currently, we are in an unnatural state, we might believe that it's natural because we've been there for so long that we forget what it's like to be in a better society. But ultimately, we're in the unnatural. And the question comes, how do we reverse it? How do we get back to the better stage, to the time when it's not exile, when it's redemption? So let's clarify, what is the exile? The exile doesn't only mean that we're not in the land of Israel, because then our redemption has arrived. There are Jews living in the land of Israel. And to some degree, there's always been Jews living in the land of Israel. It's not as much the physical place as much as it is mentally, psychologically, and emotionally where a person is at. On a physical level, yes, there are foreign powers and governments politically and militarily influencing and in charge of the Jewish people, which that applies even in Israel, because ultimately Israel has pressure and is subject to criticism, and it doesn't like, and therefore it obliges to pressure from other countries. So it doesn't ultimately have its own control of itself, but rather it still gets influenced by other societies. But this is not to say that it's a problem on its own. We appreciate that we live in a country like America, which gives us our freedom. It's not a problem that a foreign government is in charge. It's not the ideal that we're not ultimately in control of ourselves. But from the options of what the Jewish people had throughout history, these are from our better to best options available. The fact that we can live in a country that gives us almost unlimited freedom. But it's in the person's mindset as well, which is the exile. It's not just the physical exile, which, yes, like we said, it's still around even today in Israel, where we don't have ultimate control. We can't do whatever we want. And Israel is not being run exclusively according to God's ways of doing things. Rather, it's a country by Jewish people, which has a mixture of some of God's vision, some of their own vision. But rather, the bigger issue on a broader sense is our own lives. The fact that we have pain and suffering in our life, the fact that we have insecurity, trials and struggles, we have worries and calamities, issues that come our way with which we assume is normal life. Normal life has become synonymous with a challenging, difficult, struggled life. And if you don't have it yet, give it some time and wait for you to get a little older, and things will come your way. So yes, we associate life with that, but that is ultimately what exile is about. Exile is not just the general term, but the exile within each of ourselves. If we cannot fully be who we are supposed to be and who we want to be, and because of pressures of society or because of financial issues or because of insecurities, where I'm not confident with myself, I'm not so sure about my existence, if I'm that valuable, all these issues are associated with exile. It's the broader sense of exile within ourselves that we are not allowed to be free to truly be who we are supposed to be. That is an exile, which more than we have to leave exile, we have to take exile out of us. Let's see it over here on this slide. And Layla, if you could read this slide.
It is not so much that we need to be taken out of exile, it is that the exile must be taken out of us.
Very good. And we find the same issue happened with the Jews in Egypt. The Jews in Egypt had a problem of Pharaoh. They came out of Egypt. You would think they would be completely functional, healthy, normal human beings. These people, read the Torah, how much they struggled with basic necessities of following God, doing what they should be, stop complaining, be appreciated, be thankful, show gratitude. It was a problem that stuck within them because they were for so long in Egypt, they didn't learn how to take responsibility for their own lives, how to be mature adults, stop complaining, and fix something, live life normal, expect that God can handle small issues like where you'll have your food from or your water. God has it all figured out. He has a plan. He didn't take you out in order to kill you. He took you out to save you. But yet the Jewish people were so closed up in their limited mind of how they believe things should be. They had the mindset of a slave even when they were free. And for 40 years, Moses was again trying until that generation had to die, and they waited for the next generation because they weren't truly free people. They were traumatized from such a long time in Egypt, which, of course, not necessarily we're saying it's their fault. We're just stating the fact, which a lot of therapists still today say that Jewish people that had bad childhood experiences can be traced back to the fact of the Holocaust, that their parents or grandparents were traumatized and never taught normal ways of expressing themselves and shutting things off. Whatever the reason is, bottom line, we're stuck with a life where we're in exile, which means you could be in the freest country and you could have the greatest opportunities with the most money and going to the best school and still be in exile because you're not living the life that you could live. You're living a very mediocre type of life, a very amateur version, following other people and not initiating, deciding on your own where you're heading, but looking where the herd is going and following along. That is a form of exile. That is a form of not being free to the way you can ultimately be. Let's look at a verse in the Torah where God describes the exile, which I think we can say is very much applicable to today. Interesting to see how this was written by the times of Moses 3,300 years ago, and how God could describe what we go through. Sheila, if you'd like to read here, Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 64 and 65.
And the Lord?
Yeah.
And the Lord will scatter you among all the nations from one end of the earth to the other, and there you will serve other deities unknown to you, to your forefathers, deities of wood and stone. And among those nations you will not be calm, nor will you foot fine dress. There the Lord will give you a trembling heart, dashed hopes, and a depressed soul.
Okay, so if we look at this verse, number one, God says you're going to go to other lands and you will serve other deities unknown to you or your fathers of wood and stone. Today we might call them gold and silver, or Benjamin Franklin's, or any other form of money, power, prestige, likes. These are forms of deities that we serve where we become subjugated, we become subdued and like enslaved to society, which teaches us of how much we have to run after everything that everybody else is doing without being able to see for ourselves, where do we want to go? Again, this is not to say that those things are bad, but who are we serving and what is allowing us to serve? Some people look at it, they say, I'm Jewish because it helps me in my business. Judaism gives me certain values that allows me to succeed more and make more money, and that's making God serve my purpose. It's the opposite. God is the one I serve, and everything that he gives in the world is to help me. He gives me a job and he gives me income and a family in order that I should be able to serve him better. If we read this verse, again, God says about what it means to be in exile, you will not be calm. I think today, anxiety, stress, these are things that are prevalent. The more money we have, the more blessing. We bring on ourselves more stress. We won't find any rest. People are always anxious. People are not finding relaxation. And there, the Lord will give you a trembling heart. People are fearful, whether it's Iran, the economy, Biden, Trump, or anything else that they're scared of. If it's alternate side parking in New York, or if it's a heart attack, or their blood pressure, their financial status, dashed hopes and a depressed soul. These are struggles that is the outcome of an exile, the outcome of not being your true self, not allowing yourself to feel the way God wants us to feel. We should be feeling like God in the sense of secure, safe, and like we read previously from Leviticus, where God tells us all the blessings we will have, that we'll have so much grain, we'll have to throw out the old one because of the new one. God's not telling you the ultimate goal is you should be really wealthy. The ultimate goal is you should have so much wealth, you shouldn't have to worry about it, so you can live the life you want to live. An additional aspect of exile, the opposite of redemption, the opposite of the Messiah or Messianic age, is God's in exile. Let's have Eliah, if you'd like to read God's exile.
God's exile. Secondly, God is in exile. He is not sensed anywhere in this world, and it's not evident that he is in control. There are so many people and forces that purport to be independent and even adverse to God's will. They will not sense God or even deny his existence. God is not in their lives. He is not at home or in the world he created. It is not yet complete apparent to the human eye or mind that this is God's world. Sadly, this is true even in Israel.
Right. So God's in exile doesn't only refer to a specific country, but it means, is God's presence revealed? Do we align our path? Do we hold around God's Bible in our pockets like we hold around our phone? And do we allow God to be our compass? Does God feel at home in our environment? Does he come into our homes and say, wow, this is a place where I feel like in the temple? Or does he say, I wish there was more godliness prevailed or felt throughout the world? Let's read this verse from the Talmud, this quote from the Talmud. Shtani, if you'd like to read.
The divine presence traveled 10 journeys as derived from verses from the ark cover to the
The cherub in
Keruv?
English, but the kruvim, the
Okay,
right, the pictures
the
of the eight
Kruvim,
bowls. Yeah,
right? And from the Kruvim to the other Keruv, and from the second Keruv to the threshold of the sanctuary, and from the threshold to the courtyard, and from the courtyard to the altar, from the altar to the roof, and from the roof to the wall of the Temple Mount, and from the wall to the city, and from the city to a mountain close to Jerusalem, and from the mountain to the wilderness, and from the wilderness it ascended and rested in its place in heaven, isolated from humanity, as it is stated, I will go and return to my place.
So this is the other aspect of exile where God is in exile, meaning God doesn't feel any more at home like he was in the temple. He was chased out from place to place as we brought in back in the day physical other gods, other images of gods. They would serve idols and eventually chased God out. Of course, God is still in the world, but in a revealed way, we don't have God's comfortability where he feels at home in this world. Rather, he says, I have to go up to heaven because there's a lack of acceptance, as if God is uninvited, as if God is not someone that can participate in our lives, in our party. We say, God, we'll handle things without you. You're old-fashioned, out of expired, or too old to be involved within our modern day life. Let's read here another quote from the Tanya. Layla, if you'd like to read, however,
all this pertained when Israel was on a higher plane, when the divine presence dwelt among Israel in the Beit HaMikdash. But after that, they had fallen from their state, and through their actions caused the mystery of the exile of the divine presence. By your sins was your mother expelled. Through his evil deeds and thoughts, he pulls and draws down the life force issuing from the high into the chambers of the Sitra Achra, the other side.
Yeah, very good. That I think is a misspelling. So at the time when the Jewish people were in redemption, were in the land of Israel, they were living at their pristine state where they were able to connect with God. But ultimately, exile is not just that I'm not in this country, I'm in that country. That would be very primitive. It's a lot deeper. I'm not fully aligned and connected with God. I'm getting more of my excitement, more of my connection to life from other sides, things that are not aligned with God, rather than getting it from God. And the last point, Elia, if you'd like to read here, personal exile.
Personal exile. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, on an individual inner level, we are in exile. Our animal soul, the part that it takes pleasure in worldly pursuits, is dominant over our godly soul. Our higher conscience and purpose. Our godly soul, our higher conscience and purpose. There are parts of us which are not aligned with our soul mission. They do not allow God in.
Very good. So we mentioned 3 points here. Number one, we said the physical exile, the fact that we're not being governed by ourselves, but a foreign power. And we said even Israel is being governed by a foreign power because we're ultimately up to their pressure. And in a broader sense, it refers to the struggles of life, the fact that life is not easy. Point number 2 was God's in exile, which means God's presence, he doesn't feel at home. And the personal exile, point number 3, is that we with ourselves are not successful at living with our godly soul, but rather our animal soul overtakes and controls us. So these are the issues that we have in exile. So by clarifying what exile is, it can give us a lot better of an understanding what we're looking for at the time of Moshiach. Moshiach is not coming to disrupt an amazing life. Moshiach is coming to turn on the light to a very dark type of life which we weren't able to live properly, but we think we're okay because we've been in it for so long that we stop seeing that it's a problem. And we have here another quote. Sheila, if you'd like to read over here.
This aspect?
Yeah.
Oh, this aspect is in a state of exile and captivity within him. And this is the exile of the Shekinah, which is the spark of divinity that is in his divine soul. The cause of the exile is as our sages of blessed memory said. They were exiled to Babylon, and the Shekinah went with them, i.e. man, has vested the innermost point of his heart in the opposite side, namely in the soiled garments of mundane matters and worldly desires, which are referred to as Babylon, and is the foreskin that covers the covenant and the innermost point of the heart. Of this it was said, and you shall cut off the foreskin of your heart.
So to explain what he's saying, because it's the middle of a paragraph here, that ultimately, besides for the spiritual sequence on how this happened, it's also somewhat of a natural progression here. The fact that we don't live up to the way we should be living, we don't have the ideal lifestyle that we should be having, living up to the chosen nation aspect, we become embroiled in our own infighting within ourselves, and we become selfish, taking care just of our own needs. That has an effect, a double effect, not just on ourselves, but also on society in general and on the world in general, where the world in whole stops living so much in sync with a godly purpose, and it comes less of a godly conscious place. And this fighting amongst ourselves ultimately lessens the view that the world has about the chosen nation, the way we should be living. They stop looking at us that way because we don't live up to the standards we should be doing. So ultimately, by us not allowing ourselves to live in redemption, it causes the world and God to be in exile, since it's our task and it's within our hands to either elevate everything to its sublime, perfect state, or to destroy it all and bring it down to the worst case possible. As we see, human destruction can be worse than anything else that can happen. I think there's a beautiful example that brings this out. And with that, we'll finish off the problem of exile. Imagine right now we're the COVID started 2020. So imagine in the year 2033, 13 years from now, you have a child that grew up, he was born during COVID, and imagine they don't find the cure to COVID. With every vaccine that they come up with, a new strain of the virus comes about, and eventually they say, you know what, we're giving up. We'll just live a new life of everybody doing everything over Zoom and masks and no more getting together and parties, and that becomes the new norm. So imagine you have a child, he grew up in this COVID America, and you're preparing your son for his bar mitzvah. He was born 13 years ago during COVID, and now he's getting ready for this exciting Zoom mitzvah, which he's going to have with all his friends like everybody else in his class does. And you're sitting there proud of him, of what he did, and he's going to read from the Torah, and he's going to celebrate. But inside you have a little bit, you're crying, that in the sense that you say, it's sad that not only does my son not feel bad that he doesn't have a regular bar mitzvah, he doesn't even know that there is a concept called a regular bar mitzvah. I feel sad that not only does he not get to celebrate the bar mitzvah the way I did when I was younger, but he doesn't even have a desire to do so because he's unaware that there is a real normal life other than what's going on now because of COVID. That is the tragedy that a parent can weep when they feel that their son is so uninformed that he's living in a problematic time. That analogy can help us understand what we're living through in a time of exile. We're like in a time of social distancing from God, where we cannot communicate with him directly. We can only do it through computer screens. We don't have that live interaction like they had in the temple where they can come, see God, speak to him, see revealed miracles. We're living in this time where cameras could be turned on or off, there's bad connections, or not there in person. It feels so non-real. And yet, if we do it for long enough, we'll forget that this is a problematic thing. We'll forget that there is a virus that we need to take care of and we should be at better times. We could, and unfortunately, it could happen to children. Some therapists are already worried what will be the effect, even just of 1 year learning with social distancing. Imagine this was going on for 13 years. And the Jewish people, this has been going on for almost 2,000 years. Almost 2,000 years of trying to communicate with God without seeing him, only through our text, only through reading and praying, but we don't get to see those revealed miracles. It has such a effect on us that we stop even feeling bad that we don't have the better times. We start believing, yeah, that this is a perfect time. And why would I want to leave exile? Why would I want to go out from my good house? We just worked so hard on the mortgage and I got a new phone and I have friends and actually things are going well now. And God maybe will tell him, if things start falling apart in my life and people are sick and dying, then I could reconsider if we want the Messiah. But currently it's doing okay. You could maybe bring him after my lifetime. That itself is from the sad parts. That itself shows on how little we're aware that we're in an issue, we're in a problematic situation. And just like in this analogy of COVID and Zooming, whose task is it to help the situation and get out of this virus? It's not some grandiose thing that's going to happen where all of a sudden this asteroid is going to hit Earth and COVID's going to disappear. It's each and every one of us doing our part, taking care of washing our hands, whether you do your masks or your social distancing and cleaning up and taking your medication and taking your vaccine, by every one of us doing our part of liberating ourselves, becoming strong, having a good immune system to the vaccine, that makes the entire world as a whole a place where we can now live ultimately the way we want to live an open lifestyle. So too, when it comes to godliness, it's not that I just will live my life and I'll wait for some grand change to happen that God will do, and then things will change, no problem, and don't interfere with me. No. Each and every one of us has to do our part in order to make the world a better place, and only with every one of us working on our own redemption, working on allowing ourselves to live the way we should be living, returning to God, doing the right things, living a wholesome life collectively. When enough people get that vaccine, enough people get the God vaccine, where we're living our lives in the proper way, that will make the world on a whole live a beautiful life. Will make the world on a whole be a place where God's presence can be revealed. We could again communicate and celebrate things openly, freely, in a social manner without the distancing. So that's our analogy. I'll just show it here on the screen so you can have a visual of that concept. I think it really brings out the problem and then how the solution is connected. So why is your son so happy? Shouldn't he be miserable about a COVID bar mitzvah? And the answer is he doesn't know any better. But we do know better, and therefore we desire that they should at least know that this is not the perfect life. So we described the problem. Now we get to the solution. Let's read over here in our student book, point number C. Starting, if you'd like to read C.
There's a way back. So how do we get back to reopening our Jewish life the way it was? How do we get away from the new normal that shouldn't be normal at all, but has become normalized because it has been perpetuated, for centuries, and it is the only way we know.
Yeah. Okay, so let's read. How do we do this? Layla, if you'd like to read from Tanya, you could read also the header on top.
Mitzvot we do in exile increase light at the time of redemption. This culminating fulfillment of the Messianic era and of the resurrection of the dead, which is the revelation of the light of the blessed Ein Sof in this material world, depends on our actions and service throughout the duration of the exile. For what causes the reward of a commandment is the commandment itself, because by performing it, the person diffuses a flood of light of the blessed Ein Sof from above downwards, to be clothed in the corporeality of the world in something that was previously under the dominion of Kelipat Noga, negative forces.
Okay, so in short, he's saying by us doing our commandments in exile, even if we don't see the effect currently, it's having an effect of bringing down godliness into this world. And this is important to remember. Even if we don't see that our generation is the best generation to merit for this final redemption, good is accumulative. Bad dissipates and goes away on its own. So the good from all the past generations for thousands of years accumulates one on top of the other, where even if we don't do all the good ourselves, we're building on past success. The bad hangs around for just a few generations and then it disintegrates. It just evaporates. So even if there is some negativity, our job is not to focus on completely annihilating all the negativity and believing that without that we won't move forward, but rather saying there's just a little bit more good that has to get done, and building on all the previous good, that will bring us our final redemption. Let's look at the slide. And Elia, if you'd like to read this slide.
How does my individual redemption affect the world?
Okay, and the answer you'll read over here in our student book. Yeah, okay, it's on page 242. You can read it here, this highlighted section.
Okay. When each individual allows their soul to lead their body in living accordingly to God's will and fulfilling their godly purpose for which they were created, they are redeeming their soul from the exile state which they were in previously. Okay. I think maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then collectively, as a society, we redeem God from being trapped by the physicality that tried to mask his existence. We become God conscious, and that spreads to society at large. When society is God conscious, it thereby becomes good conscious, as living in consonance with that God wants is living in a way that emulates God's goodness and kindness. This will bring about a world in which we all live in harmony, fulfilling the will of God. A world with no war or jealousy, a world of helping, sharing, and healing. This revelation of God will bring about only revealed good and positive experiences, even in the physical condition of this world. The world would be in its ideal state, the way it's supposed to be.
Very good. So this is what, by us being aligned with God, allows the world to be aligned as a good, kind world, the way God wants it to be. And let's read over here from Maimonides. Sheila, if you'd like to read, starting with the header, Moshiach, the Messiah, and then read till the bottom. Oh, can you see it, Sheila?
I didn't hear.
Oh, so can you
The
read from?
sages and the prophets did not yearn for the messianic era in order to have dominion over the entire world, to rule over the Gentiles, to be exalted by the nations, or to eat, drink, and celebrate. Rather, they desired to be free to involve themselves in the Torah and wisdom without any pressures or disturbances, so that they would merit the world to come as explained in the Hilitat Teshuvah. In that era, there will be neither famine or war, envy or competition, for good will flow in abundance, and all the delights will be freely available to us. The occupation of the entire world will be solely to know God.
Very good. So he clarifies here, we don't desire the times of the Messiah so we can finally control all our enemies and annihilate them. But on the contrary, we're looking to live in peace so we can connect better with God. We want a world where we don't have a problem with connecting to God. Let's read our next point. Steiny, if you'd like to read over here, not a disruption.
Not a disruption. Will Mashiach be a great disruption to our lives? Will everything change? Change can be frightening. Do I continue?
So just one moment. The answer is no. It will not be a change where we're going to try to disrupt as much as possible to give us a miserable time, so we should be forced out of our pleasure and comfort zone and given an awful experience. But rather, on the contrary, it's turning on the light. It's opening up and allowing us, instead of tapping around in the dark and imagining this might be furniture, this might be a chair, a table, a bed, I'm not sure what it is. Instead of feeling step by step and trying to navigate our lives, allowing us to be able to have brightness, to have vision, to be able to see things for truly the way they are, that is what the concept of Moshiach is. Okay, continue.
The Hebrew word for the world is helem, hidden. Our world hides the true purpose of its existence, obscuring from our view the truth of our purpose here. Mashiach will not create a sudden supernatural change. Mashiach will be like switching on the light and revealing the good and godly in every part of creation.
Very good. And just to clarify over here, where it said the Hebrew word for the world is helem, they meant to say the Hebrew word is olam, which comes from the root of the word helem, which means hidden. So the world is about, the truth is really there, but it's hidden. Messiah is about revealing, turning on the light, allowing us to see things for the way they should be. And Layla, if you'd like to read this part, everyone.
Everyone and everything will reflect its own ultimate potential. We will still be the same people, living the same lives and observing the same Torah. But we will do it with the light on, with the knowledge of what, why, and for whom we are doing it.
Very good. Beautiful. Now the next question is, back to our point of, is this something that we came up as a coping mechanism, how to deal with hard times, but it's all baloney? Or maybe we just took it from another nation. So Elia, if you'd like to read D.
D, is it true? We've suffered a lot as a people. Perhaps the notion of Moshiach was invented by someone trying to infuse our nation with hope in the coming of a better time. We've lived like this for so long, it seems surreal to think that it could change.
Right. So it's not something that just people made up in order to survive. And it's not something we took from another religion, but rather, let's pull it up on a slide. Sheila, if you'd like to read this slide.
How does my individual redemption affect the world?
Oh, no, sorry, 1 second. Did it not pull up?
That's, I'm sorry, maybe I'm doing it wrong. It's on my phone, so
Oh, okay, no.
that's
So,
the only one I got. Sorry.
okay, so maybe it could be I didn't do it correctly. So it says here,
That's the only,
the exile.
oh, wait here. Oh, the exile. Oops, it disappeared.
Yeah, okay, yeah, you can read it. The
Now I
exile
don't
and
see any,
oh, okay, I'm not sure what happened there.
but now
So
I
the
don't see anything.
and redemption were both foretold in the Torah and by the prophets. Now, it wasn't that the prophets told it to us at hard times when the Jews were suffering and kvetching and complaining, the prophets were trying to get them to say, oh, don't worry, soon we'll get to the rest stop and we'll buy some pizza, it'll get better. Even during the best times that the Jewish people have, when there was a lot of prosperity, even during the first temple, when the Jewish people, we say that was the best time, when the Jewish people had complete control, their enemies were scared of them. Not only did they go to battle and win, but they did not even have enemies attacking them. That's the ultimate peace, when you don't even have to go to war to win, but rather no one comes in the first place to bother you. Even during those times, the Jewish people were always praying and hoping for the time of Mashiach, for the times of the Messiah, when we'll live in a perfect world, a time when it will be the ultimate success for what we are waiting for. Let's pull up over here the verse where this is a quote from the Torah. Notice how this is in Deuteronomy before the Jewish people even entered the land of Israel. Could you imagine you were just in slavery for hundreds of years? Moses takes you out, and before he brings you into the land of Israel, he says, you should just know that you guys will be eventually kicked out of this land. You guys will leave into exile because you won't listen to God. And I'm telling you now that eventually God will bring you back to the land of Israel. He'll gather you from all the nations of the world because he'll spread you out in all the nations. And if you look at that today, I don't know of any other religion or any other small nation like the Jews that has people in every corner of the world. The more hidden and far away the corner is, the more the Jew wants to get there, because we like going to the farthest places like Hawaii or anywhere else. And God tells us, I know that you will be outcasts in every nation, meaning you won't be someone that's accepted amongst everyone as part of them. And he'll gather us from all these nations and bring us back to the land. Now, you could have said, the Jewish people should have told Moses, Moses, we didn't even enter the land. Why are you telling us that we're going to be kicked out and be brought back? Because Moses was aware that even when the Jewish people enter the land of Israel, it's still not the perfect time. He said, this is all a buildup of having some form of a temple, some form of connection with God, but it's still lacking. It's still not the perfect time. From the beginning, we always are waiting for that time when, unfortunately, we might only learn it by being in exile, but we'll eventually reach that stage where God says you will be so connected with God that you love God with all your heart, with all your soul, like you love everything else in this world, where God will be just a part of our day-to-day life as much as we have all the physical items as part of our day-to-day life. Let's have Layla, if you'd like to read this quote.
Prophecies about Moshiach coming. God will return and gather you from all the nations where the Lord your God has scattered you. If your outcasts have been driven out to the farthest parts of heaven, from there will the Lord your God gather you, and from there will he fetch you. And the Lord your God will bring you into the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it, and he will do you good and multiply you above your fathers. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your seed to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live.
Very good. And now the prophets are filled with these prophecies. We're just going to pick some. These are from the more famous ones. The translation here in the English is a shorter version of what you have in the Hebrew. But Elias, would like to read from Isaiah. And this is from multiple chapters in Isaiah, which, believe it or not, Isaiah was a Jewish prophet. As much as he's quoted in other religions, Isaiah is a Jewish source.
The word that Isaiah, the son of Amoz, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem, and he will judge the nations and punish many nations, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations shall not lift up sword against nation, nor they learn war anymore, nor shall they learn war anymore. For the Lord shall comfort Zion, he will comfort all her ruins, and will make her wilderness like Eden, and her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness shall be found in there, thanksgiving and the voice of melody. The wolf also shall live with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and calf and young lion, and the and the fattling together, and little child shall lead them, and the cow and the bear shall feed, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. And the suckling child shall play on the pit of the asp, and the weaned child shall put his hand in the viper's den. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of knowledge of the Lord as the water covers the sea.
Very good. So these are some of the prophecies where he says how perfect the world will be, that you want it to be scared of snakes, lions won't eat other animals, nations will not rise against other nations, and like he says, they will beat their swords into plowshares, which means they'll use weapons as forms of bettering society, which we'll get to momentarily, how that prophecy already started to be fulfilled. And let's learn from Zechariah. We'll have Layla, if you'd like to read it.
Thus says the Lord of hosts, old men and old women shall dwell in the streets of Jerusalem, and every man with his staff in his hand for the fullness of days. And the streets of the city shall fill of boys and girls playing in its streets. Thus says the Lord of hosts, if it is marvelous in the eyes of the remnant of this people in these days, should it also be marvelous in my eyes, says the Lord of hosts. Thus says the Lord of hosts, behold, I will save my people from the east country and from the west country, and I will bring them, and they shall dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God in truth and in righteousness.
So these are a few quotes which we brought from different prophets and the Torah, stating from the beginning this was the plan. And to respond, Layla, to your question, yes, the Ari made an emphasis and a focus again on Moshiach, but not that he invented or came up with this idea. It was always from the beginning. And like we said, the idea of shining a light, he turned on the light on certain aspects of Judaism that unfortunately were forgotten for one reason or another. And he said, let us not forget what our ultimate goal is. Let us not forget what we're working for. So he didn't invent, he just refocused us onto our ultimate goal that we were always working for. Here, we'll show a short clip over here.
This is the story of a little neshama that was sent down into the world to do lots of mitzvahs, learn lots of Torah, and help other neshamas. To do stuff, the neshama had to dress up in a body. Sometimes the body helped the neshama. Sometimes the body didn't want to help. When the body grew bigger, told the neshama to leave it alone. The neshama was sad and cried, but the body didn't listen. And so, after a while, the neshama just fell asleep. Without a neshama noticing it, the body started getting into big trouble. It didn't like trouble. Without a neshama, it just couldn't get out of it. Then one day, the body walked by a show and heard a shofar. It sounded like a baby crying. The body stopped. A tear fell down its cheek. Something inside it started moving. It was the neshama. The body was so glad to have the neshama back. Together, they did lots of mitzvahs, learned lots of Torah, helped other neshamas, and made the world a beautiful place the way it's supposed to be.
Okay. So that's explaining to us on ultimately what we're looking forward to with Mashiach. Now to get into the next point, which is who and when is the Mashiach? Who is the Mashiach? When will he come? So Judaism has clear guidelines on that as well. Let's start with Sheila. If you'd like to read, I don't know if you could see it now, E.
Mashiach is a person who will lead us all to redemption as soon as the time is right and not a second later. One of the foundational faiths of a Jew is to believe every day that Mashiach could arrive at any moment. Mashiach is not just an event and an era that will unfold. It's a person who will take charge in bringing in this era. The word Mashiach actually means the anointed one.
Very good. So Mashiach is something that we're supposed to believe is going to happen in our time. Every day we pray it should happen today. And it's a person. It's someone that will lead us like Moses leading the Jewish people. Mashiach is not a God. Unlike in other religions, we have one God and only one God. But Mashiach will be a Jewish leader that will lead the Jewish people to a better life like Moses has led the Jewish people out of exile in Egypt. Let's read another quote over here. This is qualifications on who Mashiach is. Maimonides writes it clearly. He's from the only authorities that write about this. So his word is taken as the Jewish law. Let's have Eliyahu, if you'd like to read who is Mashiach.
Who is Moshiach? If a king arises from the house of David, who studied the Torah and engages in the commandments like his ancestor David or David, in accordance with both of the written and oral laws, and he convinces all of Israel to walk in its ways and repair its breaches, and he will fight the wars of God, and the person is assumed to be the Mashiach. If he does all this and succeeds, and builds the temple in its place, and gathers in the scattered exiles of Israel, then he is definitely Mashiach. And he will correct the whole world to serve God together, as it says, for then I will return the nations with clear language to call together in the name of God and to worship him as one group.
Very good. So just to give a short story, I think that brings up this point well. There was a non-Jew that asked the rabbi, he said, you believe in a Mashiach that's going to come and save you all. What happens if your Messiah comes and I don't believe in him? I say he's not the real Messiah. He's not the real guy that's supposed to be coming. I'm waiting for someone else. So the rabbi said, if you won't believe in him, I won't believe in him. Because the Messiah will be someone that everyone will believe in. He'll be someone that leads the entire world to bettering themselves, to be understanding God. And it'll be something that's so accepted that no one will doubt it. There won't be politics then as this group appoints this Messiah and this group another one. We will stop them with all the strife and arguments and fighting, and then the world will be united all under one. And if we won't all be united, we know it's clearly not the right one. So here he gives someone that's leading in the path of becoming the Messiah. And how do we know that he's for sure the Messiah? When he brings all the Jews to Israel and he builds the temple, then, first builds the temple and then brings all the Jews to Israel, then we know he's for sure the Messiah. So our job is not to look around and start guessing who it is and figuring things out on our own. Our job is to continue doing our part of bettering ourselves, becoming better people, and then God will send the Messiah at the right time. And this just allows us to know who are we supposed to look out for when he comes, but not that we have to stop what we're responsible to do in order to find someone hidden somewhere in Antarctica. Okay, let's read over here. Needless to say that if someone arises and not just does not strengthen the Torah, but diverts from it, like we had other leaders from other nations, other religions, then that's surely not the Messiah. Since the Messiah is supposed to come to lead us to serve one God, like we had here clearly, this is a quote from the prophet that he says, and to worship him as one group, that we should know, everybody should know that there's just one God. Anyone that comes and teaches us about other gods is clearly not the Messiah. Now, what do we have to do to merit to the Messiah? So the answer is clearly written over here. And Layla, if you'd like to read.
Redemption through repentance. All of the prophets commanded the people to repent. Israel will only be redeemed through tshuva. The Torah has already promised that ultimately Israel will repent towards the end of her exile, and immediately she will be redeemed, as Deuteronomy 30:1-3 states. There shall come a time when you will experience all of these things, and you'll return to God, your Lord. God, your Lord, will bring back your captivity.
So in short, he's saying here that by us returning to God, repenting, which means doing the right thing, will hasten the Mashiach. And if it doesn't happen on our own, he speaks about it that God will make us in one way or another, even though we have free will, God will sort of like a chess master can checkmate you into a certain position where you're forced to. God will force the Jewish people to repent by bringing on them different leaders, different dictators, or anti-Semites that will make the people want to return to God. But ultimately, it doesn't have to reach that stage. We can on our own do what we should. And as we know already, the Chabad Rebbe would say many times, we definitely already passed this stage. We all have returned to God to one degree or another at one point of our time or another. And the amount of suffering that the Jewish people went through to come closer to God, by now we are all ready for the Mashiach and his coming. I'll show here a quote, how we're ready for this. This is coming even from a non-Jew. We'll get to this in a second. What are some ways that humanity has already progressed? Let's look at what Bill and Melinda Gates wrote in 2014, just about 6-7 years ago. Sharon, if you'd like to read this.
By almost any measure, the world is better than it has ever been. People are living longer, healthier lives. Many nations that were aid recipients are now self-sufficient. You might think that such striking progress would be widely celebrated, but in fact, Melinda and I are struck by how many people think the world is getting worse. The belief that the world can't solve extreme poverty and disease isn't just mistaken. It is harmful. By almost any measure, the world is a more gentler, kinder, and safer place to be.
So this is what the last point of the class we're going to focus on, and when this will conclude, and that is the coming of Mashiach. We already see how the progress is going in that direction. We see how the world is ready for it. We already started initiating on our own many of these changes, but they're so subtle and slowly that we don't even notice it. We take it for granted. Let's run through quickly a few activities. Let's run through war in the past versus present. In the past, countries celebrated war. You attacked because you were just bored or you wanted more money or power. Today, almost every country wants peace to one degree or another. Move on. This is, let's just show this on the slide a second. This is from the United Nations in New York. So across the street, they have this. This is part of their facility, but across the street, they have this engraved on the wall, a prophecy from Isaiah, which we just read. The United Nations was built on nations getting together and saying, we want to spend money on figuring out how to avoid war. Just as this prophecy says, later on, America and Russia, when they started de-escalating the Cold War, they said, we're going to use tanks and other weapons that we were using for nuclear purposes or to threaten another nation. We will start using that to better the lives of our farmers, turning them into tractors. So they took tanks and they made them into tractors. Shows us about this prophecy, beat their swords into plowshares, meaning using tools of destruction to start bettering the world and making it a better place. Getting back to other examples of how the world is already getting ready for the Messiah. Let's look at hunger. I don't know today of one American that dies from hunger. And in the world in general, hunger has definitely gone down by vast proportions. Studies show that there's actually enough food in the world today to feed everyone. It's just a problem of getting it to the right people in the right time. It's being thrown out in one place where another place needs it. But in the US, people are just having trouble of not being able to eat the foods they want to eat, but it's unheard of that someone should die literally from hunger because they didn't have anything to eat. Moving on to health. In the past, entire nations were wiped out. You had in Europe, half of Europe died during the bubonic plague. And today, new treatments and discoveries are being are being discovered year in, year out. And if we just look at this coronavirus, how years ago they would have no clue what to do, where today, within months, all the nations in the world get together united, stop seeing our differences in order to overcome a plague like this, that itself is like a biblical prophecy. Moving on to occupation, the fact that in the past, every single task had to be done by each person. There was no going to the store and buying something ready. And multiple stores, multiple restaurants are selling things that are all ready. Everybody had their own farm, their own cow, and they had to deal with everything themselves. The fact that you have jobs today where someone can work from anywhere, do any task, and how everybody is working as a team, where one person never has to go out in the field, but he can just do his job of being a doctor, and another guy a lawyer, another guy a banker, where we're having the world united as one. If we think of how long it took them to prepare a meal in the past, starting from chopping the wood and drawing the water from the well and slaughtering the chicken and cleaning it all yourself. If we look at Jewish practice, the fact that what percentage of Jews today are free to observe Judaism, and the answer is probably 100%. Maybe a few cases you could think of where we're not able to practice Judaism, but almost in every country, this is unheard of. Back in the day, Jews were oppressed in every country. There were like unheard of countries where Jews can literally be as free as they want to practice their Judaism. Technology. One of the prophecies is that God's wisdom will be revealed all over the world. The fact that we have internet today, where literally every Torah study, class, lesson, lecture, quote from the Bible, you can get in the palm of your hand, anywhere, at any time, in a moment's notice, is literally filling the world of God's knowledge. And we'll finish off here for Maimonides. He says that our job is to wait for Messiah to come. And even if it's taking time, that's not to tell us he's not coming. That's just to push us more to say he's gonna for sure. If he didn't come yet, and we know he's coming, then for sure he must be coming this minute, because he was already supposed to come last minute. And if he didn't come this minute, that means we're just closer and closer to his coming. Let's move on to our takeaway and key points that we discussed in our class, and we'll have each one of you share with us what you took out, starting with Elia, if you'd like to read.
The Messianic era is the ultimate purpose of creation. Our present state of exile is an unnatural state. Moshiach is the revelation of the world's true reality. So, yeah, we're not supposed to be in Galut. I mean, we are, but that's not what like the ideal state of the Jews. And so once Moshiach is here, then hopefully that will be solved.
Okay, very good. Layla.
When each individual experiences their individual redemption as a society, we collectively become a God-conscious society and a good conscious society. Yeah, so we talked about how it's more about taking the exile out of us individually than taking us out of exile. And it's a lot of a mental, emotional shift that we have to make.
Right, very good. So by each one of us doing our part, automatically the world will be a better place. Very good. Sharni, point number 3.
Our nation has yearned for and awaited the redemption for nearly 2,000 years. And we're also supposed to wait for Mashiach to come every day.
Very good. Very good. Point number 4, Sheila, if you'd like to read, if you can see it on the bottom left.
Yeah, Mashiach is not a supernatural change. We will still be the same people, living the same lives, but everyone and everything will reflect its ultimate potential.
So we'll be freed from all our problems, and we'll be able to live the ideal life, the dream type of life that we have. That will be the times of Mashiach. Okay, Elia, point number 5, top column.
The concept of Mashiach was not born out of despair. The Torah and prophets and the Talmud all predicted and foretold the exile and coming of the Messiah. Yeah, so it's not like some sad thing that people told their kids so that they could have hope. It's like actually something that we've known about for a while, and yeah.
Even during the good times, even before the Jews entered Israel, the first time, 3,300 years ago, they were already told that you just know there's a whole lengthy process that's going to happen here. You'll be in Israel, you'll be exiled because of your sins, and then eventually you'll be brought back. Okay, Layla.
In Jewish tradition and law, the Messiah has specific qualifications and specific tasks that he will have to accomplish. So, yeah, it can be a Jew, it has to be a Jew. And it can't just be anybody, anytime, but also we're always asking for the Messiah to come.
Give us one specification that tells us what's the main thing the Messiah is supposed to be doing, which allows us to know who's not a Messiah.
Like doing good.
Right, very good. The main thing he's supposed to be doing is connecting the world with God, making the world a good place. So anyone that doesn't further God's goal, we know clearly he's not the Messiah. Okay, Shtarni, point.
The era of Mashiach, in the era of Mashiach, there will be no evil, war, hunger, and suffering. The entire occupation of the world will be only to know God, because that is the true purpose of the world, and that's like at the healthiest stage, no distractions.
Very good. And we clarified that the rabbis weren't yearning for Mashiach because they were waiting for a time they could finally take out their revenge on all their enemies and control the world and collect taxes and live in mansions. They said, we don't want all that for itself. We want that in order that we should be able to live the ultimate life that we desire to live. We're looking for a time when we can not be distracted by the pain and suffering and serve God without all the issues that we currently have. And last point, Sheila.
With every mitzvah, we get closer to the finish line. We don't know which mitzvah will finally tip the scale and land us in the time of Mashiach.
Very good. So each and every one of us has to know it's not that if Mashiach didn't come yet, he's not coming, but rather it could be that everything is waiting for you to do that one last commandment, that one last deed that will tip the scale for your own good, meaning it'll make you a better person, and then it'll tip the entire world. So each and every deed are just as important as everything else that happened, because it's just one more straw that we need to tilt the scale and allow the better times of Mashiach. With that, we'll conclude. Thank you all for joining. It was a pleasure having you all. And congratulations, Layla and Eliad, doing great on your test. Good job. And we will follow up next week. We have 3 more classes to go. Okay, all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.